Hi, my name is Nanabee, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create appealing thumbnails for your videos. Now for the program that I'm going to be using today, it's going to be Photoshop. I pay basically a monthly subscription for this, I believe around $20 a month, but it's not exclusively for thumbnails. I'm an artist, so I use Photoshop for other things. But if you can't afford Photoshop, there are a couple of free softwares. GIMP, Krita, those are two of some of the free softwares that are similar to Photoshop. There's also Clip Studio that is cheaper than Photoshop, but basically you can use any software similar to Photoshop to yield these results that I'm going to be showing. Now the first thing that I always do is I make sure that my image dimensions are 1920 by 1080 pixels at 270 pixels per inch. And once I do that, so we'll start it up, this is what you see. You will be introduced with a big square with nothing on it. Three things I always think about when I'm producing my thumbnails is the focal point. Now, the focal point is typically the main focus of the image or the scene. In art, there are many ways you can direct the viewer's eye towards your focal point. Here are a few examples of pictures that I've compiled to show you guys that have very obvious focal points. This is important to me because when I personally thumbnail, I want to make sure I'm pitching a narrative to my audience about the video I'm creating before they even click on the video. Number two is you always want to think about negative space. Now, negative space in photography is about finding the right balance between having information on one side versus no information on the other side. So this is pretty good. This image that I picked is a pretty good example of negative space. The reason being is because the background is quite blurred and the subject or the focal point, which is the finger right here, is on the front. So it's super obvious and it's not distracting. And then finally, the third thing that I always think about is the colors. I don't want things to be too saturated. I don't want things to be too dull. I always want to make things vibrant and eye-catching. So having said that, got the 3 points across, I will show you exactly what I do. Normally I start off with two images. I always have two images, a background and the subject that I want to show. Here we go, this was the original image. With video games, or with my Let's Play videos, the way I pull my images is directly from the editor that I use. So for Concrete Genie, for example, the very first thing I look for, or I think about, okay, what happened in this episode? Well, Ash painted the rest of the buildings in this avenue or on the street, and he finally finished the masterpiece for this location. So in my mind, I would think, okay, Ash is feeling pretty good about himself. So I sifted through my video, and I always look for shots where my subject is very obviously in the shot because I don't want anything else around. So like this, I would never use this. It's not as appealing as, for example, maybe right here. This is what I used. Now with Hit Film, basically I went into options, export frame, and I exported the frame of the shot here. This is how I normally do my thumbnails. Now, you might be using Sony Vegas or iMovie. You can also export still images or still frames from those editing softwares as well. But for the sake of my example, I'm using HitFilm Express. Now, once I've decided on what I want to show, so my subject and the background, I went to the quick selection tool, and right here on Photoshop, this is the easiest way. This is how I do it. I just click on the quick selection tool. So that's W on your keyboard. I select my subject right here, boom, wait a second, and then it will automatically select your subject. In my mind, I was like, okay, I don't want any of this background information. If you want that, that's totally fine, but I already picked my background. I'm just gonna pull this out. Basically, this is what I did, and then I was like, okay, I also want the fence thing, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to be perfect with it because you could always adjust it once you're done. And then another thing for you to note is the size of your brush will dictate how much information your selection tool will pick up. So mine's really small because I don't want a lot of pixels to be picked. And this is what a pixel looks like. If you zoom all the way in, every little one of these boxes is a pixel. So mine is 3 pixels wide. So it'll just pick up that many pixels per stroke. And then all I do is I make sure that this layer is rasterized. I always rasterize the layer so that I can edit it. And then I hit Control X to cut him out. And then I delete the layer because I no longer need this anymore. And then I paste him in with Control V. And then I went in, I hit E for my eraser tool, and the bracket keys on your keyboard will alter the size of your brush. So I'm gonna just clean it up. And this is with my mouse. If you have a tablet, you could do this too. And basically, once I got my subject to how I wanted him to look like, I ended up with this. The third step, after I add my background and modify or strip my subject from the image that I want, I make sure that the layer that the subject I have is selected. I go into Image, Auto Contrast, and Auto Tone, and it automatically lightens the colors for me. Of course, there are instances where you as the creator can decide whether or not you want your subject to have light or dark elements to it. But for the sake of the majority of thumbnails, you always want to make sure they're light colors. So eventually I ended up with this. And then the next step you want to do is you want to add an outline to your character so that you want to really pop that subject forward. The way I did that is super easy. You hold down Control and you click on the little layer box of your subject. You create a new layer, drop the layer below your subject, go into Edit, Stroke. Now for my characters, it's always 10 pixels. Location, center, mode normal, opacity at 100%, and this is what you get. Automatically it does it for you. That's the wonderful thing about Photoshop. You can also do that with all the other softwares. Then on the outline layer, I go into blending options, drop shadow, and then I adjust the drop shadow appropriately to how I want it to look. Sometimes you want your shadow to be really bright, sometimes you want it to be really dark. Now, if you notice, there's a little artifact right here. Just clean it up with your eraser, and then that's done. I'm happy with my subject. Now I want to lighten my background. So I create a new layer, bring up the paint bucket by hitting G, and get a white fill so I can add that on top of my background. And then I dump that in the background. I go into my opacity for my layers and I reduce it a little bit. And you can go anywhere from maybe 25% to 40%. It's up to you. I always go around like 30%. So I'm happy with how this looks. I imported my logo. I put my logo on every single one of my thumbnails. And I do the same thing that I did with my character subject. I Control click on the layer options, create a new layer, drag it below my subject layer, edit, stroke, 10 pixels. See now, because my icon is so small, or my logo is so small, I don't like how thick this is, so I will undo it, stroke, 5 pixels. Boom. Same thing, go into my stroke layer, blending options, drop shadow, adjust my shadow settings to how I want it. Boom. Now I always put my icon in the bottom left corner, the top left corner, or the top right corner. Try to avoid putting anything with words or your icon or anything on the bottom right, because that's where the timestamp goes on YouTube, and you don't want the timestamp to cover up your logo. And then once I did that, I went a little extra and added the Thug Life glasses with everything I already taught you guys. And now I'm happy with it. I like how this looks. This is exactly what I wanted. It gets the point across with what I was trying to show. And then the final step is I went into export, export as. Now this was a JPEG, but a PNG is of a higher quality. Because it's 2.1 megabytes, that's not gonna fit. So you want your thumbnail to be 2.1 and below, but the file was too big for YouTube. So I just converted it to JPEG and it still looks pretty good. And then I exported it. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. This is my very first time ever doing a tutorial like this, so I really hope you were able to learn something from it. If you found this video useful, please give it a like. If you want me to make more tutorials, let me know in the comments down below. I put up videos a lot. So if you want to stay in the loop with me, don't forget to subscribe. Follow me on my socials. The links are all down below in the description. Anyways, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!